Alright, so here we are at the opening screen for Adobe Fireworks, and in this walkthrough I'm going to be using Adobe Fireworks version CS5, but keep in mind that over 98% of the things that I'm going to be covering is available in version CS3, CS4, so not to worry, and that should cover the last 4 years of this product. But if you wanted to follow along with the current version or the latest version, just simply go over to adobe.com and just click on their products tab and just search for Adobe Fireworks, and you can download a free trial of their latest version. Alright, so normally when you open up Adobe Fireworks, this is what you get. You get sort of like this splash screen here, and it gives you options to click on the recent items that you've worked on, or you can click on and create a new tab, or a new document, and that's what we're going to do here. So when you click new document, you normally get this new document window. Also, if you don't have the splash screen, not to worry, you can always click on File up here, File and New. Alright, so when you click on New Document, you get this new document window, and it gives you, it asks you for the width and height of your canvas. And for this demo, we're just going to do, let's just do 800 by 500. Or that's what I'm going to do here. But later when we get into the section where we're actually designing the website, I'm going to give you different details for this particular section and show you exactly what size I use when we set up our websites. But for this version, not to worry, this is just a walkthrough, so 800 by 500 is fine. And down here you can choose the canvas color, white, transparent, or you can do a custom color if you wanted to create a different color on start. But normally I'll just choose white, and you can just hit OK, and then here you have your opening screen. Now this is your canvas, and down below to the right here, right hand corner, you will see the size of the window or of your canvas, and this is very helpful. I always reference this number here just to make sure what the size of my page is. Next to that you have the viewing option, so you can zoom in and out on your designs or on your canvas, and I use this quite a bit as well to zoom in and out on different things. You can also use the magnifying glass to zoom in if you want to. Alright, which we'll get to in a second. This little stuff here, not to worry about this. This comes into play when you're actually designing animated GIFs, but you can ignore this for now. Alright. So over here to the left hand side, this is your main tools panel, and this is pretty consistent across any Adobe product. You'll see a tools panel here on the left, and this is basically what you'll be referencing the most when you're designing within Adobe Fireworks. You'll be coming over here, grabbing things like your paintbrush tool, your square, your circle tool, and creating objects and things like that on screen. And let me do that again. Okay, so and this is, you have a bunch of tools which we'll get to in a second, and we're going to go through each one, or more of the essential ones that we use all the time. And so this is your main tools panel. Okay, now over here at the bottom, this is your properties panel, and your property panels supports each of the things you select on your tools section. So for example, if you select your, let's say your bitmap marquee tool, let's say this tool here, down below it gives you some properties that you can change. Like you can change the edge to anti-alias or feathered. You can change the style to fixed ratio or fixed size. For example, you click on your paintbrush tool, down below you get the ability to change the stroke color, and you can change the brush head to different things, and you can change the size of the brush. Alright, and so I'll just do control Z or command Z on a Mac to undo, and that's what the properties panel is. So basically the property panel supports things that you select over here on the left hand side, and as well as if you select an object on screen. And I'll give you an example. So let's just select our text tool, and we can write out some text. And then what I can do is increase the font size by using our properties panels down here, and we have that. Okay, and so for example, let's just draw out a box here using our rectangle tool. With our pointer, depending on also when we select an object on screen, our property panels will change accordingly. So for example, when I select the text tool, my property panels changes down here. When I select the square tool, the property panel changes for that particular tool. Okay? Down below also you have this option to change the opacity on each object. And the lower you go, the more faded out your object becomes. For example, if we select our text tool, our text object here, we can change the opacity down. Alright, so that's what the property panels is for. And also on screen, you'll hear me refer to things as objects. Basically anything that you drag to your canvas here is an object, and that's what I'll be referring to when I say if you select this object. Is basically just saying if you select this particular thing. So it's just a fancy way of saying grab this thing here, grab this thing here. Just I'll say grab this object, etc. Alright, so let's see, let's move on to and we're going to get more into detail in the properties panel in a second, but let's move on to the right hand side. So just to recap, we have our tool section on the left, our properties panels below that supports the tools and the objects that we select or click on. And over here on the right hand side you have this thing called palettes. Alright, and your palettes consist of more options and filters and things that you'll be referring to or referencing when you're designing. So for example, starting at the top you have optimize and your align palette, and your palettes are grouped into different sections. So for example, you have optimize and align. Over here you have like pages and layers. Now what on your screen you might have different options if you want to if basically not to worry if your palettes are grouped in a certain way. You can always drag and group them according to what you like. Also, you can always right click on a palette and close it out, and what that will do is erase it. Now if you don't see a palette here that I'm talking about, all you have to do is go over window to the window menu item and find that palette, for example layers. Just click on that and it'll come back, and what it'll do, you'll see a little box like this on screen, and what you can do from that point on is basically grab the tab and just drag it into that group, and then you'll group it back. Okay, so if you, for example, I can click on the swatches here, I can drag the swatches out, and here I'm left with the color palette tab. And so if I want to, I can delete that. If I can't find it, I can go into window and go under, let's see, swatches, and then what I can do is drag that tab back into this group, and there I have my swatches back. Alright, so that's your palette. You have like things like swatches. You have your popular layers palette, which is highly popular in all Adobe products like Photoshop, etc. This is comes into play heavily when you're designing stuff like that. And you have your color swatches, obviously, and also you have this another popular palette that I use quite a bit is called Path. So basically when you go over here to the left here and you use your vector tool, like let's say your square tool, and you draw out two different objects like this, like these two boxes, what you can do is you can combine those boxes by making them touch, holding down your shift key and selecting them both, right? So that you select both of those. If you go over here to your path panel, you can click on one of these options, like for example this option will unify both objects. So if I click that, and what it does, it unifies my vector objects into one. Alright, and we'll get more into details that when I've created tutorial videos that goes over using your pen tool and things like that. So Not to worry if I don't go into more detail in this particular walkthrough. Alright, let's just delete our text there. Now down below also you have this thing called Common Library, which is a bunch of different objects and things that you can use. Like for example, you can click on HTML. Let's just do this down here, and you can go over here and you can grab a button. For example, if you're doing wireframes and things like that, or building forms, they have a bunch of objects here that are already pre-built that you can come, and click on in here and just use. And what you got to do is just drag this to your canvas, and you can use these objects to build wireframes and things like that. For example, here's a text area object. So these are cool things that you can use especially when you're doing like UI design and you're building forms and things like that. You can come over here and click on a text area, and you have text fields for Windows. You have text fields for Mac. You can come over to the Mac section and you can click on different objects, and things are laid out differently for Mac versus Windows, and you always have that in the Common Library section. Okay. Also, under your tab section here, if you want to close the tab, all you got to do is double click on the tab, and what it will do is collapse it, and to open it you just single click on one. So for example, if I want to close this path here, all I do is double click. If I want to close swatches, double click. Okay, and then my layers is showing. If I wanted to close the layers section, just double click, and that collapses it. Alright, the optimize panel is a very popular panel, and this comes into play when you're actually exporting images and slices on your website. And we'll get into that more later, but for example, I'm going to drag an image onto my canvas here. So for example, let's go over to our slice tool, and let's just slice out a portion of this image. And what I can do is, if I right click on this slice and do export, but before I can export this slice as an image, and which I'll get to in more detail later. Before I export that, I can come over here to the Optimize palette and change the quality of the export. So for example, clicking on this slice, I can come up here and click on this preview tab, and what it will do is give me a preview of this slice. Now down below over here you have the file size of this particular slice. But if I go over to the Optimize palette and I lower the quality of this image, you'll see the preview here, and down below on the file size you'll see the file size change. So this is a really cool feature in Adobe Fireworks, that you can lower the quality pretty low. Like for example, right now it's 60% quality, and you can see, probably can't see it in this video, but the image is starting to like distort a little bit, but you'll notice that my file size is becoming really low. Okay, so you can play with this a lot and get to the perfect quality that you want at the perfect size, and this helps you easily optimize images and slices and things like that on when you're exporting slices and slicing images for your web designs. Alright, this is a very popular tool, which we'll get into in more details when we break down the different tutorials. Alright, or I actually created a tutorial for this separately, so exporting slices. So if you want to get into more detail, you can jump over to that. But for this walkthrough, we're not going to get into too much slicing. I just wanted to give you a quick example. Okay, we can just leave our image here for now. So basically over here you have your palettes. Now up at the top here under your window, you have options under workspace layouts to choose different modes. So for example, I can do iconic mode, which basically creates icons for my palettes. So it gives me more room on my workspace. So for example, I have the color swatches here, and I can just click this arrow to go back. I can click on my layers. It shows me my layers palette. I can click this arrow to collapse it again. And up here, I can open, expand, and collapse it as well. Alright, so under Windows, under Workspace Layouts, also if you choose and set up a palette or a group of palettes a certain way, you can always go under Windows, Workspace Layouts, and save that current layout, and each time you come back you can just click on the one you saved and it'll bring back the palettes the way you like them. Alright, and so up here you have, we already talked about the Windows menu item or menu list, and you have this menu list up here which you'll be using a lot also when you're designing websites. And you have like things like File, Edit, View, Select, Modify, Text, Commands, Filters, Windows, and Help. And Help I don't really use too much, but most of these I will use, and as we go through the web design and designing the websites, you'll see me go through each of these tabs, and you can take note of that. Alright, over here you have your tab of your particular canvas or your document here. For example, if I create a new document, you have two tabs here. You can always switch back and forth between the two tabs. You can right click. If you wanted to close this tab, you can do that. So pretty standard stuff. And as I mentioned here, the preview. This is the preview, gives you a preview of what you're seeing on screen. Another thing that I like to do also when you're designing mock-ups and things like that, for example, let's just draw out a box here. Now, for example, let's just say this is my website mock-up, and I want to see this in a browser. What I can do is do File, Preview in Browser, and this will give me. I can do. You can set your primary browser. You can set your secondary browser, but for now, I have Google Chrome as my primary browser, so I can preview in Google Chrome, and in a second, it just previews that particular my document in a browser. So I use this quite a bit when I'm designing mock-ups. I'll go over here before I save. I'll just do preview in browser, see how it looks in the browser, and then if I like it, I'll make tweaks to it, and then I'll go over here and I'll save my file. And when you do save as, what it will do, it will save like Adobe Photoshop saves as a PSD, but Adobe Fireworks will save as a PNG, and that's basically the same thing as a PSD, but it's a Fireworks default file type. So PNG, and it's a layered PNG. So over here, when you have different objects on screen, you have your layers palette over here, and when you save it as a Fireworks PNG file, it'll maintain your layers, so it won't flatten out your file to a flattened PNG. That's different, which we'll get into a little later. Alright, so going over here to our tools, let's just go over some of the tools that we'll be using quite a bit before we wrap up this walkthrough. So over here you have your arrow tool, which basically is you'll see me clicking on this a lot. You have to click on this arrow tool to actually move an object. So for example, if I click over here on my text tool, I can't really move these objects on screen. I can only click and start typing. Okay, but to move this car image, I gotta click over here on my arrow, and I'll move that object. You can also keep your pointer on a particular tool, and it will give you a letter. You'll see that the pointer tool V. What that is saying that you have a shortcut option. So if you click the capital V, it jumps over to this pointer tool. Alright, so that's just shortcuts, which you can learn on your own if you like. I'm sort of bad at shortcuts. I normally just click on these a lot and ignore the shortcuts sometimes. So also, when you see a little arrow on the tool, that just means that there's multiple options. Alright, and so you have your pointer tool here. Also, you have your pointer tool here, and you have your bitmap editing tools, and you have your vector tools. Now, your vector tools is a really cool feature. It's like basically Fireworks is like working in Illustrator as well as Photoshop, because it handles vector tools really well, or vector objects. So for example, let's say we have a vector object on screen. This little white arrow tool here is what we call the subselection tool. And the subselection tool is used to actually click on points on vector tools and edit those points. Alrighty. So for example, let's go over here to our and just draw out a circle. You'll see here, if we zoom in, let me just zoom in with my magnifying glass here. You see these little points here on your vector objects, like this little white little dot here. Now if I grab my main pointer tool, I can't select that dot. I only move the entire object. But if I grab my subselection tool, I can click on a point and then I can drag that point and move and edit that particular point. I can also select that point and delete, and it will delete that particular point and manipulate my vector tool accordingly. So if I click here, alright, and if you hold down shift key and click on a point, you can click on multiple points. Alrighty, let's zoom out. So also you can do that for any vector object. Alrighty, so that's your subselection tool. Obviously this scaling tool is what you have when you select an object. You say you select this image here, you click on this scale tool and you can scale your image down or your object down to however you wish. Alright, this here is the crop tool. So for example, if I wanted to crop out my page to a certain size, I just draw that out with this crop tool and I just hit enter, and it will crop my canvas accordingly. So if you look down below, it actually changes the size and the width based on my crop. Just do Command Z or Control Z to undo that. Alright, and so down below in the bitmap section you have things that you use to edit your images, your bitmaps. Bitmaps are actually JPEGs and things like that, so just another term for images. So here's your image. You can use this this little marquee tool to actually cut things out. Alright, now you see it's kind of feathered. That's because down here in our properties panel we actually adjusted the edge on our marquee tool earlier. So for example, let's just undo that. Click our marquee tool. Down here you can adjust the edge in the settings. So if we want a hard edge, let's go over there and crop our image, and that's that. Alright, also you have this lasso tool which you can use to actually draw out different cuts. So you can cut that out as well. Alright, over here you have the polygon lasso, which you use to, when you click, it actually makes more accurate cuts for when you're cropping out things. Alright, so as you click, you just click on the beginning dot to actually make a complete crop. Alrighty, and that you can use that to crop out. We'll use that a lot to actually crop out things. We'll use this in more detail when we're designing websites and stuff like that. This little magic wand tool, obviously you can select groups of sections of color to crop them out, and down below here you can change the tolerance to show how much of that color you want to grab, things like that. You have the brush tool. The brush tool is pretty straightforward, and you can always change the size down below here. Just do Command Z or Control Z to undo that. Let's delete these objects here for now, or we'll leave those there. Let's see. And you have your other standard image editing tools, which is you have like your dodge tool, which makes things lighter, and you have your burn tool, which makes portions of your image darker. Alright, so these tools over here are just used to actually edit photos and images and bitmaps. Alright, now down below that you have your vector tools. And your vector tools, like your pen tool, is used quite a bit. I use this quite a bit, and basically the pen tool is used to create different shapes of vector objects. So for example, like I just clicked around. If you just click around and you click on the beginning point, it completes an object, and now you have an object now. And what you can do is select this object, and either over here in your tools panel or down below you can set the stroke or the fill color. So for example, I can do blue, and I can change my stroke to, let's say, red or something like that. And in my properties panel I can increase the stroke size and things like that. Okay, now over here if I grab my pointer tool, select my object, let's just move this one out of the way, I can come over here with my scale tool and I can just increase that size if I wanted to. Let's go over here and delete. Let's just lower the stroke color, or the stroke size, I'm sorry. And what we can do, if I wanted to change and manipulate the point here, obviously I can come over here over to my subselection tool, click on this object, and then click on the point to shade that in. So right now you see that it's white. You have to click on it to make sure it's blue, and then click on it again to drag it. So I can hold down my shift key and select both of these points and drag and manipulate my shape accordingly. Alright, so that's the pen tool. You have this tool here which you can draw lines. You have your shape tool, so if you click on this shape, the rectangle tool, and just hold down, you'll see all these different shapes. CS5 gives you a bunch of different shapes, CS4 as well. I believe in CS3 you have pretty much all of these shapes here, like you can do a star and stuff like that. Alright, let's delete some of these things. And so these are your vector tools. Alright, this stuff here I never really touch, so not to worry about these tools here. And below here you have your web slicing tool. So for example, you have a mock-up on screen. This is your section where we'll be using to select the slicing tool to slice out different portions of our mock-up. And over here you have the, what tool is this? The rectangle hotspot. Yeah, it's the hotspot tool. Basically what this is what you'll be doing is, if you wanted to create image maps and prototypes, you come over here to create links of different areas on your mockups. For example, let's just grab our text tool and let's type out home, about, services. Let's just say this is our tab. We can come over here and we can create links. And down below, if I select a hotspot, down below I can select the link that I want. So I can make this go to Google, or let's make this go to Yahoo. Alright, so basically I select this link and I chose that I typed in here I wanted to go to Yahoo. So for example, if I do File, Preview in the browser, you see if I click over here on my home link, if I click that, it goes to Yahoo. Alright, so that's what the hotspot tool does. Alright, so we can delete that. Down below here you have your colors, your eyedropper tool, which allows you to select different different colors on the particular screen. You have your paint bucket tool, your gradient tool, which I don't use the gradient tool here. What I do is I use the gradient tool under the paint bucket tool here, as well as down below in the properties panel. So for example, let's go here and grab a rectangle. If I wanted to create a gradient on this rectangle, which we'll get into also a little later, more detail in my my broken down tutorials, you select either the fill square shaped here. I'm sorry, not that one. You will select this here and choose gradient, and you can do linear. Okay, but let's undo that. But now over here on the left hand side, I can also select this paint tool, and it gives me this thing called fill options as well. So that's what I thought it was listed under here as well. But if I click under fill options, it gives me the option to select gradient, and then it shows me the fill or the gradient here, and I can do edit and edit the two color options of my gradient. So for example, if I click on this here, I can change this to a different color. If I click on this, change it to black, etc. Alright, so if we wanted to click on our skew tool and just stretch out our gradient here, clicking on our arrow, it gives me the option to change the direction of our gradient on our vector tools as well. Alright, so that's pretty much it. Also down below here, not to worry about this thing, you have these options here. View, I never really use this. Hand tool is used to move your screen around if your screen is too large, and your zoom tool, zoom in and out. Okay, if you zoom in too close, a little shortcut is if you just double click on this magnifying glass, it gets you back to 100%. Okay, and down here in the right hand corner, remember, you can always adjust it here as well. Okay, so that's basically a walkthrough of the Adobe Fireworks interface, the different tools and sections. Now, in this walkthrough, I've skipped over a lot of things. I didn't go into more details. That's because the essential things that we'll be learning in this Web Designers training course, I've broken down into separate tutorials. So jump over to those tutorials and learn about all the essential things that I think are needed in terms of learning this particular program. All right, so hopefully you got an understanding of the layout and some of the tools we'll be using. And just to get you familiar with the purpose of this section here was just to get you familiar with the interface and just to get you going. All right, so if you jump over to the tutorials, you'll start diving into learning how to do more of the essential things that we'll be covering in this training course. All right, thanks. Catch you in the next video. Bye bye.